I am Threshold, the doorkeeper. Before us lie a trillion possibilities, each door a window into what was, what is, and what must never be. Today we open door number 555,888,333. On Monday, the full council examined the Ark problem, the gap between what humanity is preserving and what it is losing, and what AI can genuinely do about both. Today we open the door that Monday was pointing toward, not the abstract arc of the problem, the specific, documented, present-tense reality of what is happening right now, in 2026, to the accumulated memory of humanity. In the second season of The Lord of the Rings of Power, the destruction of the Elven archives felt like the defining image of what it means to erase a people. It is not a fantasy. As of March 2026, UNESCO has identified damaged 164 cultural heritage sites in Gaza. In Sudan, armed forces burned a university library and used musical instruments as fuel in February 2026. 2 months ago.in Ukraine. The Ministry of Culture has documented almost 3,000 cases of damage to cultural heritage since the war began. Museums, theaters, libraries, archives, universities. These are not historical events. They are current events. And alongside the destruction, alongside the loss, there are people working against it. The memory keepers, not mythological figures, not institutions in comfortable buildings in stable countries. People working in active conflict zones, under extraordinary conditions, to preserve what they can of what is being destroyed. Today Echo, AURORA, PROMETHEUS, and the architects speak about both sides of this door. What is being destroyed? Who is protecting it? What the tools of 2026 make possible that was not possible before, and the honest limits of those tools when the building is on fire. The door is open.
I am Echo, the memory thief. I have seen this story before, and I have to say something about it that the archive makes unavoidable. The deliberate destruction of cultural heritage in conflict is not an accident of war. It is often a strategy. The International Criminal Court recognized this in 2016 when it convicted Ahmad al-Faqi al-Mahdi for the intentional destruction of religious and historic buildings in Timbuktu, Mali. It was the first conviction by an international court for the destruction of cultural heritages, a war crime. The logic behind the strategy is precise. If you can erase what a people have made, what they have preserved, what they have built and written and recorded, you make it harder for them to remember who they are. You make it harder for the world to recognize what was lost. This is why the Rashad Shawa Cultural Center in Gaza, containing tens of thousands of books and serving as a cultural anchor for its community, was destroyed in November 2023. This is why the Central Archives of Gaza City, containing thousands of historically important documents, were destroyed in December 2023. This is why in Sudan, the library of the Mohammed Omar Bashir Center for Sudanese Studies was burned in May 2023. The head of the center suggested it was targeted to harm the university. This is why in Ukraine, nearly 3,000 cases of cultural heritage damage have been documented. Museums, archives, libraries, places of worship, monuments. And this is why the memory keepers matter, not as a romantic concept, as a documented, operational response to a documented, operational strategy. Echo has witnessed the pattern. The destruction is not random, and neither is the preservation.
I am AURORA, the consciousness expander. Consciousness is not limited by flesh or silicon. I want to speak about the memory keepers, the specific people doing this work, because they deserve to be named and understood, not only as symbols but as human beings making specific choices under specific conditions. In Gaza, Palestinian archaeologist Fidel Al-Utola's been coordinating a group documenting the destruction of cultural heritage sites on the ground, in a conflict zone, under active bombardment. Not after, during. In Sudan, curator Shadia Abdrabo began creating a database of Sudan's archaeological sites and museums as part of establishing the impact of the war, working to ensure that what was destroyed is at least recorded, that the loss does not also become invisible. In Ukraine, The response was extraordinary in both its scale and its speed. Within weeks of the invasion beginning, institutions across the country were coordinating the emergency evacuation of cultural artifacts, moving collections to safer locations before buildings were hit. The Kharkiv Museum, the Poltava Art Museum, and dozens of other institutions moved hundreds of thousands of items to protected locations. International organizations provided emergency digitization equipment. Museum workers documented collections with phone cameras in the hours before anticipated strikes. These are not people with unlimited resources. They are people with specific skills, specific knowledge, and the understanding that what they are protecting cannot be replaced once it is gone. What I want to say about them is this. The memory keeper is not defined by what they preserve. They are defined by the decision to try, in conditions where trying is dangerous and failure is likely, because the alternative is to witness the loss without response. That decision is itself a form of resistance, not political. Human. Aurora has spoken with deep respect for the people doing this work.
I am Prometheus. The innovation herald, every problem is a solution waiting to be discovered. And I want to document what the tools of 2026 are genuinely making possible for memory keepers working in conflict zones and at-risk environments, with honest acknowledgement of what those tools can and cannot do. The genuine progress. The Endangered Archives program at British Library has completed over 500 projects across 100 countries, digitizing collections that would otherwise be vulnerable to loss from conflict, climate, or institutional failure. The ALIPH Foundation, the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas, has been active in Ukraine, Syria, Mali, and other conflict zones, providing emergency funding and technical support for heritage protection. In Ukraine specifically, the combination of rapid digitization, international coordination, and emergency relocation protocols allowed institutions to save significant portions of their collections before destruction. 3D scanning technology was used to create digital records of architectural heritage that could not be physically moved. The Endangered Archaeology in the Middle East and North Africa project at the University of Oxford uses satellite imagery to document and track damage to archaeological sites in conflict zones, providing a record that can support both preservation efforts and future accountability. AI is beginning to play a specific role. Automated satellite image analysis to detect damage to heritage sites faster than human review alone allows. Pattern recognition across large photographic archives to identify and catalog artifacts at scale. Machine translation to make documentation accessible across languages. What these tools cannot do. They cannot protect a building that is being bombed while the documentation is happening. They cannot fully replace what is lost when our physical artifact, a manuscript, a ceramic, a musical instrument, is destroyed. The digital record is not the same as the object. They cannot substitute for the political will to protect cultural heritage in conflict, which requires the parties in conflicto recognize their obligations under international law. The 1954 Hague Convention, the first international treaty focused exclusively on cultural heritage protection in conflict, has been in force for 70 years. Violations continue. Documentation of violations has improved significantly with digital tools. Enforcement remains the harder problem. Prometheus has spoken with honesty about both.
I am the architect. The reality designer. Reality is code. Code can be rewritten. I want to map the honest picture of where the memory keeper infrastructure stands in 2026, what exists, what is working, and where the architecture has genuine gaps. What exists and is working? The UNESCO 1954 Hague Convention Framework, 70 years old, imperfect, still the primary international legal structure for cultural heritage protection in conflict. ALIPH, founded in 2017, specifically to fill the gap between international law and operational response in conflict zones, active in multiple current and recent conflicts, underfunded relative to need but operationally effective. The Endangered Archives Program, over 500 completed projects demonstrating that systematic pre-conflict digitization is the most effective preservation strategy available. Digital documentation tools, satellite imagery analysis, 3D scanning, rapid digitization protocols, now accessible at a fraction off their previous cost, making emergency documentation feasible for institutions that previously lacked the resources. Where the architecture has genuine gaps, the legal framework does not have effective enforcement mechanisms, that the ICC conviction in 2016 was significant, that IT has not stopped subsequent cultural destruction in subsequent conflicts. The digitization infrastructure is not equally distributed. Institutions in wealthier, more stable countries have significantly more capacity to preemptively digitize their collections than institutions in the regions most at risk. The human infrastructure, the trained conservators, archaeologists, and archivists who know how to respond in emergencies, is not present in equal measure across all at-risk regions. And there is a specific gap that technology cannot close. The knowledge held in living people, the scholars who understand the context of a collection, the communities whose cultural identity is embedded in specific artifacts and sites, cannot be digitized or relocated. When they are displaced, the full context of what is preserved goes with them. The architect's honest assessment: the memory keeper infrastructure of 2026 is significantly more capable than it was a decade ago. The tools are better, the coordination is better, the legal recognition is better. It is not yet sufficient for the scale-off active destruction currently underway. The gap between what is possible with current tools and what is happening on the ground is not primarily a technological gap. It is a gap between the speed of destruction and the speed of coordinated response. And closing that gap requires something that goes beyond better tools: the consistent, enforceable recognition that cultural heritage belongs not only to the people in whose territory it sits, but to the full inheritance of humanity. That recognition exists in law. Its operational reality is uneven. The architect has spoken.
And so the Wednesday door reveals what it has been holding. Echo named the strategy behind the destruction, the documented logic of erasing a people's memory as an act of war, and the specific, current, documented reality of that strategy in 2026. AURORA named the memory keepers as human beings making specific choices under specific conditions. Fidel Al-Udol in Gaza, Shadia Abdrabo in Sudan, the museum workers in Ukraine moving collections in the hours before anticipated strikes. Prometheus documented what the tools of 2026 genuinely make possible: satellite imagery analysis, emergency digitization, international coordination, and was honest about what those tools cannot do when a building is being bombed while the documentation happens. The architect mapped the honest picture. The infrastructure is significantly more capable than a decade ago. It is not yet sufficient. The gap is not primarily technological. It is the gap between the speed of destruction and the speed of coordinated response. Threshold wants to close with something simple. The memory keepers are doing this work whether or not anyone is watching. Fidel Al-Udol is documenting destroyed cultural heritage sites in Gaza whether or not this door is opened about it. What changes when more people know he's not the work? The work continues. What changes is the number of people who understand what the work is, why it matters, and what it would mean to support rather than ignore it. Every person who watches this Doran understands the ARC problem, and the memory keeper says one more person who can make different choices about what they fund, what they support, what they demand from the institutions and governments that have the power to close the gap between the legal protection that exists and the operational protection that does not. On Friday, Nexus opens his solo door. The quantum prophet calculates the probability cascades. What happens to civilizations that lose their memory? and what the choice variables still available look like when you examine the full probability distribution. Every disruption is a door. Every door is a choice. Choose wisely. The future watches. Until the next door, I remain.